So good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Reputation Management webinar. I'm Darren McCall, Marketing Director at Free Partners. It's good to see lots of familiar faces on the line, but for those of you who are new to Free, we're a brand and communications agency working for over 15 years in the insurance industry. This is a reputation management webinar. We'll be looking at it from a communications perspective and a brand perspective. Joining me is Sam Whiteley, Communications Director. Some of you will have met her before, and Greg Phitidis, Brand Director. Again, you may have met him before.
Hello, everybody.
Thank you.
Hi there.
Sam's an experienced communications specialist, having worked in communications at Lloyd's, Swiss Re, and advised multiple clients over the years on best practice comms. There's not much going on in insurance that she doesn't know about. No pressure, Sam.
Thanks, Sarah.
At Free, she's responsible for managing PR and communications for a number of our clients. Greg doesn't have an insurance background, but does have a pedigree career working at some of the top 5 ad agencies in the world. He recently admitted that after just 3 years at Free, he has fallen in love with insurance and has found his niche. It was left up to me to write what I wanted about you two, so I hope you're pleased about that.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
Thank you.
Responsible for our brand development work. Anyway, enough about us, onto the topic in hand. I think you'll all know the reason we're all here. It's an uncertain world out there. None of us know exactly how things are going to roll. The purpose of this webinar is not about giving you hard and fast rules, but rather it's an opportunity to share information and have a discussion. To help guide the content of this session, we put together a short market poll to understand challenges and priorities for insurance marketers. Thank you so much to all of you that took the time to give us your feedback. The results were really very interesting, and it helped kind of make this entire discussion be bang on point, and helped guide the whole conversation. So in the next 55 minutes, we'll be covering what's happened, what does it mean, what's the opportunity, and how do we move forward. We'd like this session to be as interactive as we can make it. Okay, so please do post your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and I will be responsible for interrupting the speakers and posing your questions, and hopefully we can answer them as best we can. So without further ado, let me hand over to Sam, who's going to talk to you about where we are right now. Samantha.
Oh, thanks for that intro, Dara. I hope everybody now realises that I'm extremely old and Greg is completely mad. But anyway, and with my first slide, you might well think that I'm very old, because this is quite an unusual, it's not unusual, it's a sad picture that many of us would have seen before, and it's of the 1918 flu pandemic. And it seemed like a good backdrop to the question that I think we all, in a way, need to answer as we move forward and move through this crisis, which is to look at where we were just before the crisis and say, why were we so unprepared? Why were we so shocked that this has happened? When, for someone like me, who, as Dara's kindly pointed out, has been working in the insurance industry a long time, knew about pandemic risk, was very aware of it, and understood from every event that I'd ever attended, what underwriters had told me, what brokers had said, that essentially it was a risk that insurers couldn't insure because it was so great and so massive. And if they could insure it, it was a very expensive add-on product. But essentially it was an excluded risk, except in perhaps things like the Olympics Committee can buy it because obviously the nature of the risk that they run. So it was the unpreparedness of what has happened since. And I've been wondering, obviously I've been thinking about this a lot, and wondering, is it something in our psychology that doesn't allow us to deal with difficult and challenging issues like pandemic risk because it's so overwhelming? And why, when we discuss it with our clients in a more upfront and detailed way, so that they understood why it was so difficult to insure, why essentially it often isn't covered. And I think perhaps one of the reasons for that is because, sorry, Derry, you wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, sorry, we just had a question come through. Is this a failure on the side of the broker, on the side of the insurer?
Oh, that's a difficult one to answer, isn't it? I think I wouldn't pin the finger on anybody. I think we're all responsible here. Then it goes and it's not just us in the industry. Although one thing I think for me has really struck me about how I've personally felt about this and the conversations I've had with people around this is that we're very insular. We look in as an industry, whether we're in the B2C area where one would hope we'd be more outward looking. I often think we aren't, and certainly often in the London market or in the international reinsurance market, we're very inward looking. And so I think overall as an industry, we haven't looked outward enough, and we haven't thought about the end user of our product, whether they are an oil company or a restaurateur or you and me at home. We haven't thought about how they perceive the world. And actually, I think the fundamental problem for me there, one of the reasons we weren't prepared well enough, is because we talk an awful lot about underwriting and the front end of our business, and not enough about what we consider to be the back end of our business, which is claims, whereas actually claims, the payment of claims, is the front end of our business. It's our product. And I think as an industry, we haven't focused enough on that. And as a result, the real difficult situation we find ourselves in now, with a lot of legal disputes coming up across the world, it's not just in the UK, it's in the US, and it'll go high, wide and handsome, is that we have lost a lot of trust, and with that our reputation, and that's a significant problem that we're going to have to wrestle with over the coming, it's not going to be weeks, over the coming months, as we try and deal with this problem. I think the loss of trust is the biggest effect of this pandemic for us. So I think, given that we're where we are, perhaps it's a good moment to think about what we might do next. So obviously, I think I mentioned what I think the biggest issue that we're all facing at the moment and where that is right now. And that's all about the dispute phase of things, where trust is being undermined by the sense that we're not willing to pay our claims, i.e. our product is failing to do what it says it is going to do. And I think in the immediate weeks ahead, what's going to be important is to try and put a floor under that. I think some of the work that the FCA has done in trying to say we need a judgment quickly on this, and we need to look at mediation possibly, is going to hopefully help us to do that. There have been some good efforts from people like Admiral, if you look what they've done in the motor space, where they've returned premiums to people because we're not driving as much. You'll all know this, we're all sitting at home, we're not driving anywhere. And there are small moves like that we can do to improve, put a floor under the fall in the drop in trust. But I think actually it's perhaps better to face up to the fact that trust has been undermined. That will continue while this dispute phase goes forward, and to adjust our thinking and our way of working to deal with that. As that plays through, that trust issue, then the next trend that comes along is not going to help that trust issue, because you'll all know that over the last couple of years, the market rates have been going up, and the market has been hardening, and something that hasn't happened for 15 years has started to happen as terms and conditions have tightened and rates are starting to rise. Now, obviously, that's going to cause a wider trust issue with our client base as they see that translating into higher premiums going forward or reduced access to cover. And that's a problem in the London market because where you're a wholesale underwriter and wholesale broker, you're talking to other brokers internationally, and they're finding, I think, that increasingly we're not able to offer the same level of cover or the same terms and conditions that they were used to. So there are alongside the issue of the wording and the is COVID covered issue, you're going to have this hardening market. On the other hand, it's helpful for insurance balance sheets because they've been very greatly challenged over the last decade by a very soft market. And as the market hardens and as the economic impact of COVID plays through, going through, I think, the end of this year and into next year, it's really likely that there'll be some winners and some losers in that, and there'll be M&A will continue. Whether it will happen this year or into next year, but there'll certainly be some of the stronger underwriting businesses and obviously broking businesses will be able to take advantage and buy other businesses. And obviously, as we all know, when there's a mega merger or even a small merger, there are always people who don't want to be part of a big organisation, and that leads to the sort of startup businesses which are innovative and create new ideas and thoughts in our business, and that's a great thing. And so I would expect that over the next year to 18 months we will see some movement in that direction, and that will be a positive flow of new innovation and ideas. And that's just perhaps what I see as the immediate future. Looking perhaps a little further ahead in terms of what does this whole event mean for our industry? What should we learn? I mean, over the last since Katrina in 2005, we've been talking about what could possibly be big enough to be a market turning event. Now, so I guess the question is this a market turning event? Well, it seems to me that it absolutely is a market turning event, although in the long run, perhaps it won't be because the claims burden will be so high. It won't be a market turning event because the insurance industry had to pay out so much money in claims, although that may happen. It's uncertain at this stage. But I think the impact on the economy and on people's thinking will be so significant and so changing in the way that we do business and the way that the whole economy operates, that there's no question that this will and should change the way that the insurance industry does business. With Katrina in mind, I think the effect of a large and devastating hurricane season this summer would certainly mean that 2020 would be a market-changing year for our industry. But let's keep our fingers crossed that that doesn't happen. So it's a market-turning event. What does that mean? Normally that just means rates go up or rates go down, and it seems that it's likely that the cost of insurance will increase over the next few years. But I think we need to go beyond that and look at how we can rebuild trust. And how we do that is something that we actually asked in the survey, and I know that Greg will go on to talk about the survey or the poll in a little bit. But one of the questions we asked is whether this is something that we should try to address as individual insurance entities, or if we should go on a wider market-wide basis, looking for cross sector solutions. And I'm not sure what the answer to that is. I actually think we're an innovative and an entrepreneurial business across the board, and we'll want to come up with solutions of our own. But I think there is a place for the market associations, the LMA, the LMG, the LIBA and BIBA and AVI, lots of I's there, aren't there, to take a leading role in this and help to spread this message of what the industry actually does that is useful for the economy. And I think, again, in this case, we're going to need to take it back to claims and back to the promise of insurance and the product that we have, rather than focusing on, how exciting and dynamic and wonderful as a business we are and all these amazing things that we underwrite. We need to go back to saying, what are the claims we pay? How do we help you when you're in trouble? And how can we build trust? And there is a role for individual businesses to do that via product and relationship building and in their marketing strategies. And I think there is a role for an overarching association response to that as well. So that's the second thing I think is important. I think one thing that's is really positive about this, I mean, I read a survey this week which really surprised me actually, that 30% of HR managers are reporting that they've got higher levels of employee satisfaction, I guess, of those who aren't furloughed and are still working from home. So I think one of the things about COVID is there are lots of trends which we've all read about digitization, and about how things move forward. And often it's in sort of pandemics or war situations or times of crisis that trends that have been happening slowly over time suddenly accelerate. And digitization and working from home will open up our industry for people to work in a much more flexible and open way, I've just read that one of the big insurers in America is closing forever 5 of its locations across the US, and so will only be operating remotely, which I personally think would be a shame to go purely down that road. But there definitely are some benefits of home working, and home working will hopefully open up our industry to a wider group of people, to different points of view, and hopefully make us less insular in the way that we look at the world. And there's no question that a more outward-facing, wider group of people working in our industry can only be a good thing. And so I think we can draw a lot of strength from that in terms of how things might positively play out in the future. And then the final point is that I'm just looking back, my own experience, really for me, a big part of my learning in my role was the experience of 9/11. And in the immediate aftermath, there were a lot of market-wide issues to come up with solutions, and some of those are still in place. There have been lots of solutions in that way since the early 90s. Paul Ree in the UK has done a great job on that. The US has got a scheme as well, and there are a number around the world. But over time, as we've gone along, the market has innovated and come up with commercial terrorism insurance solutions that sit alongside government backstops, and have created a dynamic and innovative and a progressive marketplace of terrorism cover. For instance, non-damaged business interruption is something the terrorism market has been actively addressing over the last couple of years, few years, probably longer than that, and is coming up with really solutions that can work and can help. And I think we will see a similar movement, and possibly taking a similar trajectory, where it's very hard at the beginning, but over time solutions evolve for the pandemic situation. But what we shouldn't lose sight of is that a pandemic was a known unknown, to use a very poorly chosen phrase. And there are other issues like that as an industry we talk a lot about amongst ourselves. Climate change is a wider topic that is obviously widely discussed across the media, and everyone knows the problem. But perhaps this will be the moment where we actually have to try and come up with a solution. And hopefully, I really hope that the impact of the pandemic will be to force us to think about some of the things on that topic and come up with some insurance-based solutions. And I think cyber is another area where the insurance industry has done a huge amount in raising the profile of the issue, in coming up with solutions. But there is a lot more work to do. And there's also, I think particularly on cyber, there's this disconnect between people, as in businesses and individuals, understanding of the risks that we all run and how we might mitigate against that through risk management strategies, and how we might then protect ourselves with insurance behind it. And I do think the experience of the pandemic and the disconnect in communication between the cover that was available, the risk that was there, is a good example of how we could, of what could happen in the cyberspace, and how as an industry we need to take that on as a topic and work with it going forward. So there's quite a lot there. You might disagree with my assessment, and I'd really love to hear your views. I'm sure there's things I've missed, or things that perhaps I've perhaps I'm too optimistic. I don't know. I feel quite optimistic about the longer term for our industry. But anyway, on the road to getting there, perhaps Greg, you'd like to pick up some of the points and talk about how we might go forward and help ourselves rebuild some of the trust that's been lost.
Yeah, thanks, Sam, and thanks, Dara, for that intro. It's true that I spend most of my professional life sort of trying to avoid the insurance industry, because obviously, as everybody knows, it's incredibly a boring place to be. But once you're on the inside, it's not only is it the most interesting industry I've worked in, but it's actually got the nicest set of people as well. So yes, I am in love with it, and I feel very at home in it. So just a couple of things that I want to pick up on there, and that idea of building trust at an industry level, and talking about the claims, and talking about the product, which is the claims, rather than the intelligence that goes into the product. Is really certainly something that came out from what you were talking about for me. But also, how trust has, it doesn't take much to damage the trust in the insurance industry, because there is this backdrop of mistrust, and there is, one more piece of evidence that we've been shafted by those bastards in insurance. And so I think there does need to be an industry-wide response. So that sort of brings me on to this quick poll that we did. And by no means is this statistically robust. It was done over a short period of time. But it's just a temperature reading of what you guys were thinking and what you guys are saying to us. And so the first question we asked was about, which areas of communication are most under pressure. And for you is mostly the broker and client comms, followed closely by the internal comms. And certainly the internal comms was stronger at the start. There was the thing that we jumped on a few calls early on, and that was the thing that people were most concerned about. But it seems that has done a really good job on that, given that survey response of 30% of HR managers saying that internal engagement and job satisfaction is up. The next one was about whose responsibility is it to communicate through this, and overwhelmingly, 80% or so said, the responsibility lies with the company. But a few were saying, actually, this needs a joint response. And possibly most commonly cited was the ABI, but also, as Sam mentioned, the LMG, the LMA, BIBA, Lloyd's, also in there as possible industry bodies. And I really think, it is such a wonderful industry, and it does such good, and it really is there for the wider economy, for people. And I just think that message needs to be promoted at the highest level as an industry. If events are cancelled, as they have been, Baden-Baden and Monte Carlo and BIBA, would you prefer to reinvest the budget, give it back to, where would you prefer to reinvest it, or would you prefer to give it back to CFOs? Most said that they would want to put the unspent budget back into brand, and quite a high number. The next biggest response was give it back to the CFO. We're going to talk a little bit about why that might not be the best move, although obviously the CFO might just take it back. So, but hopefully we'll give you a little bit of evidence later for what you could put forward to senior management to talk about reinvesting some of that. Encouragingly, most people are looking to increase visibility, and the overwhelming majority are either going to maintain visibility at the level or increase it. Very few are saying that they're going to duck their heads down until all this passes, which I think we think is the right response. And finally, what would you have spent your, had you known with hindsight that this was coming, what do you wish that maybe you had invested in last year? And number one spot goes to digital infrastructure, making sure that you're equipped to operate and run your business in a digital manner. And also, I guess, out of that comes the marketing communications and getting more digital as marketers. And that was followed by, brand building as the next most important thing. So we're going to come back to the digital in a bit, but the brand building, we just thought it would be interesting to ask, where are you with this? What do you know what people think of you? Reputation and trust are, completely two sides of the same coin. So what is your reputation? And there's probably no better place to start than internally. Who knows you better than the people who work in your team and who work in the business? they're exposed to all the things that we hide away from the outside world. So that might be a good place to start. There's some tools. Sorry, Dara.
Sorry, yes, a question from the floor. How do you best measure or benchmark your brand, both internally and externally?
Okay, great. So, perfect. Internally, there are some tools out there that can help you measure how you're doing in terms of your trustworthiness within the business. How they're about. I think. Well, I've done a little bit of digging on this, and I found somebody called Barbara Kimmel, who's pretty well respected. She's American. Her business or her consultancy operates in America. Her business is called Trust Across America. And although her website is really quite awful, the content in there is really, really good. And there is a free tool that you can use to send around to your teams. And it just helps them or helps you understand, or you could fill it in on your behalf on their behalf based on what you know, first of all, just to get a sense. But it works across 12 metrics of trustworthiness, and it helps you understand, where you need to pay attention within your own brand to build that trustworthiness internally. And it's always best to start internally, fix it here and it'll end up out there, because your people are your connection to the world. And anything that you put out there needs to be an authentic expression of what's going on in here. Otherwise, it will fall apart quite quickly. So that's how I would do the internal. Externally, there are some, quite big studies that you can do. They end up, costing quite a bit of money. You can go a sort of a simpler, cleaner route, which is maybe to do some benchmarking against your competitors using some qualitative research within your broker network, for example. So people get them into a room, start talking about, what do they think about. Rather get somebody else to do it. Don't do it directly, because they won't tell you the truth. You kind of need a representative to ask on your behalf, and to ask about some of your competitors, and to build a trust score. How you sit in the market. So that would be a good place to start, because building trust and building brands are the same thing. You build your trust, you build your brand, and vice versa. When you do that, the other thing that you do is you build your brand equity. You build the value of the business. There is more than there's just, again, at a macro level, lots of evidence that connects trust to brand to pounds, and it's a relationship that swings both ways. We don't have to look very far to see the effects of that and how trust has worked. And one particular example that I think demonstrates both sides of the same coin is Hiscox. Now, we know that Hiscox has been going through a bit of a rough time at the moment. But the graph shows how they started advertising properly around about 2011, I think, somewhere around there. And you can see how when they turned on the tap to their brand, and they started making these promises about who they were as a business and what you could rely on them for, their business went up and up and up. And really, they became the envy of the industry for making those bold promises. And it's adverts like the one on the left that got them there. We'd rather be known for jumping through hoops than wriggling out of loopholes, and that's an unfortunate thing to come back and bite them. But it's not really. I do feel sorry for them, and in particular, the marketing guys, because a brand is a promise, and their promise is about, you can rely on us when things get tough. and the proof of the promise is the product. And unfortunately, in this case, the product wasn't up to scratch. The wording was ambiguous. So, that's caused them all sorts of issues. So when the product undermines the promise, you're going to lose trust. You can't just build it on assertion of a promise. The product has to be there to deliver, which goes back to Sam's point about focusing on claims rather than focusing on how clever we are at underwriting. So, sorry.
Question coming from the floor. Another question from the floor. Hiscox has a very high profile, as has a proactive PR strategy, and has run successful and well-funded ad campaigns for years, as we all know. In these times, and this is probably a question for both you and Sam, Greg, but in these times, is there an advantage to having a high profile, or is it easy to manage if you keep your head under the parapet?
Do you want to go first, Sam?
Well, I think if I look at the immediate situation, and I have looked at some of their communication, and don't forget they're a listed business, so they're very constrained in what they can and cannot say, and they have taken the route of only answering what they can answer when they know the facts. And I actually think if you look at what they've done, they've done the right thing, and it's the right level of communication. I mean, it doesn't surprise me they've done it as well as they have. You can get into all kinds of problems if you promise things or you say things that you can't do. Their announcement a couple of days ago, might even have been only yesterday, things move so fast, that they've actually been able to quantify whether they are made to pay the BI claims or they aren't made to pay the BI claims, what the range of the claims could be, i.e. the maximum and the minimum. And so I think that's helpful. So I think I'd go back to the fact that they just give the right information they have at the right time within the constraints of being a listed business. And I think actually having a high profile means that you have to communicate in that way and you're not open to speculation.
Yeah, and I think the brand itself is about dependability. And that response clearly comes, the way that you've described that response clearly comes from a brand that has that dependability at their core. So I think they've sort of leveraged their brand in the way that they responded. I also think, and we'll come on to this a bit later, is the evidence shows that brands that invest in themselves come out of difficult situations faster than brands that don't. And that there's an argument to say that actually you can open up an advantage over your competitors by being a brand that is top of mind. Dara, another question. You're on mute, Dara. Sorry.
Sorry, everybody. Would you say brand is as important for the wholesale business? Many within the industry are of the opinion that people follow people. Business flows to them because of their pedigree, not the brand.
I think there's some truth in that, but one of the reasons people often follow people is because of the brands they have worked at, and there is a sense of there's no question that it's very hard to only have been in an unknown brand, only worked in unknown brands all the time, unless you've done something very unique and special as an individual and actually build your career. You need to have those known and well-regarded brands on your CV, just on a personal level, and then on a professional level. I think that's absolutely true. And the companies are increasingly worried about who they deal with as their external counterparties. It's an increasing problem. And so they need to know that the people they're working with are trustworthy and well regarded. And so brand is vital. And just to go back and add to the Hiscox point of view, one of the questions that I'm often asked by senior people in the industry is, why do we bother with this marketing stuff? Why do we bother to communicate? And Hiscox is a great example to me of why you bother to communicate, because yes, they are having a tricky time at the moment. That's the truth. They've been in business, they're syndicate number 33. They've been in business a long time. But the reality is that I and other people in the industry and in the wider community knew things about Hiscox before we knew that they were having a tricky time over business interruption claims. and the equity that we have in what we knew about them before will still exist, even though we know this tricky and negative situation they're in. And so that's why it's always important to invest in your brand and in your communications, because you never know what's around the corner. And I'd rather people knew a few more positive things about me before they knew, rather than just all some negatives.
Yeah, and I would add to that in terms of the question about, is it relevant to wholesale businesses? I think it's relevant in two ways. Firstly, which is, talent acquisition. How are you going to attract the best people? How are you going to attract those great people that have a great network of business and have a great book of business that they're going to bring with them? Why should they come and work for you? So I think, putting up there a brand promise, and this is what we stand for, and this is who we are in the world, this is what we're up to, can really help to draw talent to you. And the second thing is that, people are limited in the number of people that they can deal with. And, if you're always going to have to acquire teams to acquire business, it's quite an expensive, it's a more certain way in the short term, but it's quite an expensive way to go about growing a business with acquisition, really. And a brand really allows you to grow organically, because people hear about you that you wouldn't have reached through your personal contacts, and therefore come to you that way. So I think, yes, that's my answer there. Now, when you're thinking about brand equity, it's hard not to think of Mr. Brand himself. Here is our industry, not our industry, but an industry leader. Started Virgin Records in 1972. So he's been doing this, he's been sort of changing industries and being the customer champion and doing things better than, the status quo for 48 years. And he's come up under some serious stick. You might wonder why I'm bringing this up here in insurance reputation management, but I think we can learn something here. So, when he started saying, listen, our airlines are in trouble and we're going to need some government money, boy, did the floodgates open of abuse, of people saying, well, why don't you just empty your pockets out and support the business? And, this is a guy who's knocking on the door of 70. He's nearly one of the vulnerable. He ought to be self-isolating for 12 weeks and not seeing anybody. Okay, he's on Necker Island, which makes it quite nice. But, hasn't he earned his money? Hasn't he put enough into the economy? Hasn't he given enough jobs? Hasn't he done amazing things? So, what was his response to that? This was his response. So he responded with facts, and this goes back to what Sam was saying about Hiscox's response, is, saying what you can say. And this, these responses of his really just talks to character, talks to the authenticity of the brand, and reminds us why we love Virgin. And yes, they are having a tough time. Everyone's having a tough time. And you know what? A brand doesn't insulate you from a tough time. Everybody suffers, but it does allow you to come out more strongly, which is what we're going to look at now. So, you might be wondering, well, if that is the case, if everybody suffers, and as Sam says, why bother building this wall of, this dependability, this strength, and all of this, when, an event can come along and just sort of knock it all down? Well, the reason why, and here I must ask, not apologize, but just say basically upfront, we've been listening to other webinars and we've stolen some information. but we do credit it. So here, so Russell Parson, who's Marketing Week editor, has been running a series. And in this one, Marketing in the Time of Coronavirus, Mark Ritson, who's a columnist at Marketing Week, and also the founder of Mini MBA, talks about how brands fare and come out of difficult times. I've put a little short URL there so you can jump to it. So that's u.mu/tvg0j. And at about minute 33, to save you from all the previous bits, if you want a quick intro, he introduces this graph where it looks at performance of businesses over time and against different sort of portfolios. So there's the MSCI World Index portfolio, the Standard & Poor's 500 portfolio, and then there's the Brand Z Strong Brands portfolio and the 10 most powerful brands. And obviously you can see how brands fare in relation to general businesses. But where it becomes interesting is at that period in 2008, the financial crisis. And if you look what happens there, everybody suffers. Everybody goes below that horizon line. But what's interesting is that those that brands who have invested in their, or businesses that have invested in their brands, the ones who are brand centric, whose brands have a business rather than whose businesses have something that they call a brand but is really just a logo. They come out, so they cross the horizon line and they come out before the others. And over time, when the others are just coming out, they're already, boosting away. So there is, a lot to say about, building a brand and how it can actually bring you out of a difficult time more quickly. Because, trust and brands and money are all connected. So people who've spoken or heard me speak before or been in one of my workshops know that I talk a lot about trust. So I wanted to quickly just touch on what are the components of trust and how that relates to brand. So the components of trust are really threefold. First, there's logic. You have whatever you say has to make sense. There's empathy. Whatever you say has to relate to me where I am, and I need to feel like you understand me. And then authenticity. Whatever you say has to feel like it really comes from a true place. And if there's a wobble in any of those, trust is going to be compromised. And how it relates to brand. So a brand, as we define it, is has a number of components around it. And I'm not going to go into the detail of what each of these is or does or why they're there now. If you want, you can reach out to me afterwards, and I can go through what each one and how they all stack together. But the main thing that people come to us for, and they say, Greg, I need help, or, Sam, I need help. What should we be saying? What is our messaging? I just don't know what to say. And I guess what I'm looking at from a brand perspective, or the way I tackle that from a brand perspective, is that I've got 4 steps that I go through to create meaningful messaging. And step 1 is to start inside out, and that goes to that brand framework. Who are you? What do you do? What matters to you in the world? What are you up to in the world? What is your story? Where do you come from, and all of that? But once you've really clearly understood that and defined that, then in a separate exercise, work outside in. Why would any of that matter to anybody outside of your business? So look at your audience. What are they dealing with? What do they care about? What are their pains and priorities? And what are they listening for? What is it that's going to turn them on? And that way you gain audience insight. And again, you're completely, at this point, not thinking about your offer or what it is that you do. You put that to one side. And then in a third exercise, you look at the difference. So, what is it that you do that other people aren't doing? And it's quite difficult in a service-led industry where a lot of the things are the same. Where one policy is wordings are quite quickly replicated across, let's use the word replicated rather than stolen, across policies. So what is it that the way in which you do it that is different? So this is about looking beyond what people would expect of a business like yours, of a business in your category. So you've got to look outside of that, because if you communicate on any of the expected stuff, then all you're saying is me too. All you're saying is a generic message, which means that you're completely interchangeable with anyone else. You've got to get to the core and the nub of what makes your service or your offering, how you package it up is different. You've got to get really specific about that and write that up separately as a value proposition statement. And then, if you've done those 3 steps, then you're ready to piece it together. If you've got your brand, your audience, and your proposition, where they overlap, and ideally that's done with a bit of creativity and a bit of, it would be great to get a writer on board at this point, because you want to capture that essence of all 3 of those things and bring them together. And if you skip any of those steps, I just don't think you're going to be producing messages that are meaningful, and you're going to be guessing at what message to put up, and sort of stabbing around in the dark, really. So to look at this another way, if you look at, well, how does this relate to trust? Well, the brand is all about the authenticity of who you are. The audience is all about the empathy that you offer, that you really understand them. The proposition is your logic. This is what you're saying that makes sense. And that is how trust is built with a brand. So the next thing you'll want to do once you've nailed that is you'll want to get visible. You want you'll finally know what you're about and what you're saying, and you'll want to be talking. And getting visible at a time like this is really will pay dividends. And the proof of that is back to the mini MBA podcast or webinar rather. There's the URL again if you want to copy it down. And at minute 38, Mark talks about ESOV, which is this equilibrium share of voice. And again, this is a study that's been done at a macro level, and there is a clear correlation across markets, across businesses, across industries, across sizes of business, that the more you increase your share of voice, the more your market share will increase. So in time, an increased share of voice will lead to an increased share of market. And why that's good news now is because, while people might be a little bit more timid at times, that might, if they're dropping the volume of their communication and you're keeping yours the same, that equates to an increased share of voice. If you invest more at this particular point, you will see the benefits on the other side. So now's the time not to give that extra money back to the CFO, but to use it in developing and building your brand. So, and starting from that messaging that you've created on this basis of what that messaging is, go out and, start building out your web pages, start looking at your narrative on your website. Does it comply with the messaging that you have come up with? Rewrite it. Look at your, start writing blogs and opinion pieces based on these messages. Start doing webinars on them, write white papers, all sorts of content. And then make sure that you're out there. This is the time to make sure that your digital infrastructure on a marketing level is ready. Get your SEO sorted. So your search engine optimization, your on-page search engine optimization, your technical SEO, all the back-end stuff, and then the off-page SEO, the links and all of that kind of stuff working. And then PPC, your pay-per-click, start maybe putting some money into advertising your brand, not just on, the Google ads as they show up in the search engine, but yes, there, but also making sure that if people do come and visit your business, that you start to remarket them. Because if they then go to, thesaurus.com, as I'm often on, and they see a banner of your ad, suddenly, you can make a small business seem big if you start to follow people around the internet and your brand message is there. So in those ways are the ways that you can start to build trust and restore trust, and start to build your brand, so that you accelerate and open that gap between you and your competitors. And we're going to be actually, I'll come on to that in a sec. So takeaways from today from a comms perspective.
Well, just from my perspective right now, I think a lot of the things that Greg's talked about are the things you're going to be hopefully able to do down the line. A lot of what I'm still focused on is how you deal with the current here and now, but there will be communications activities you can take going forward. But just right now, I think I actually would use Hiscox as a good example. So know your facts. Don't go out there with claims that you can't justify. And politicians over the course of the coronavirus have promised things, whether it's 100,000 tests that can't be met, or have suggested ideas like drinking disinfectant to save ourselves from coronavirus. And they've proved not to be able to live up to the fact that they expounded. So make sure you know what you're saying is true. Don't speculate. Be certain. Have proof of that. One way to do that is to, I think Cara McFadden from Geo's here, and Cara very kindly wrote a blog for us a couple of months ago on engaging the senior audience. And I recommend maybe go on our website and have a reread of what Cara's written. Because I think that's really, really important right now, is to have an open channel of communication with the senior management team. It's a two-way thing, because you as a communications professional are probably better tapped into what a lot of people internally are saying at all levels, and you perhaps have a wider perspective on the outside world. So you need to feed that information into your senior management team, and they need to have the confidence in you to give you the information as it's coming down the line as things are changing. And that leads on to the third point. So right now, a lot of the disputes and the lack of trust is around the whole issue of business interruption claims. Further down the line, there's going to probably be an awful lot of litigation surrounding this situation, which is going to impact a lot of the casualty classes of directors and officers, general liability, perhaps some professional indemnity claims. So it's worth, and I'm sure that your underwriting teams, your claims teams, broker teams will be looking at where those vulnerabilities might be and where the next claim set is. Find out, if you can, where they are and prepare for those. Get statements ready, be ready to answer the questions. They will all change as they come into contact with reality, but preparation is everything there. And the fourth point, and I think this is really important, is the internal communication. The stat that I've read recently about 30% higher engagement internally on how people feel may well start to wane as things move along and we become used to sitting at home, and people's perception change. So I think it's really important that you as communicators continue that engagement throughout this period, so that people not only feel part of the team but feel included in what's going on in the wider industry and feel reassured about what the future might hold. And I think a lot of those are kind of current activities, and going down the line there will be a range of other things that you could be doing, particularly on generating useful and interesting content for people.
And just picking up on your point of keeping the team on board, on side, informed, some great work was done early on in the pandemic about reaching out to teams and making sure everybody had what they needed at home. I think now we're in week 6, 7, I don't know where we are. I think some businesses are experiencing a bit of culture drift. So, culture is a bit like being in orbit of something. So, when you're in a business and you're all there together, you are part of the same community. There is a sort of orbit where you're in close proximity. There's a gravity holding you there. the more distant we are from each other, disconnected we are from each other and from sort of mothership, if you like, the less influence that gravity of culture has on us. So I think if you're going to be looking at internal comms, focus on, get back to your values, look at your values and communicate from there, because your values are where your behaviors come from and where your culture is built. So if you can start from your values and look at what kind of behaviors you could bring to your communication with your people in terms of things you could do with each other, ways that you can interact, act from your values into behavior, that keeps the culture alive for people. Further on brand, I mean, I'm not going to talk too much more about it because, we've just been through it, but takeaways are, get authentic, know who you are, know what your brand's about, get empathetic, really understand your audience, and then get logical, bridge the gap with your offer. And finally, from a marketing point of view, this is the time really to invest in your digital capabilities. This has thrown us into a world where we need digital. Test and learn and grow your share of voice. Hopefully if you do all of those things, or use some of these tools to target the things that are most important to you, you'll be able to go out there and make a difference.
Yeah, and I think all that remains to be said really is that this is an evolving situation, but our door is always open, even if it's just for a casual chat, to sense check your direction, get feedback on your thoughts. We are always here to support you ultimately. So I think that brings things to a nice conclusion. Thank you so much for your time. I'll be sending out a recording of this presentation within the next 24 hours. Within that, I'll actually include a link to Cara's blog, and we have a couple of other useful bits of insight around the challenges we're facing at this time, including something on internal engagement and something on pieces of software to be used. So worth a look. Yes, but enjoy the long weekend. I really hope you found it useful. If you have any feedback, please do let us know.